I birthed my own children completely unmedicated. I felt like I was gonna die, but I made it through, and that was incredibly empowering. I know what I am capable of now, but at the same time, having had that experience before, I don't feel like I need to like prove that to myself this time. Hi guys, it's Amanda with Eat Pray Crunch, and today I wanted to preface this video with why I am choosing to go the hospital route this time. I actually talked a lot more about this in my 16 and 17 week pregnancy update, and I will attach that here if you want to hear a little more in depth, but I will touch on it in this video as well. But I have had a number of you asking, are you gonna have a home birth? Are you gonna be in the hospital? And so I feel like this would be the perfect context to discuss that in. I am having a hospital birth this time, and I actually have a couple of reasons why I decided to go that route. So first of all, with my first baby, I had a home birth, which I don't have that story up on this channel. I will eventually get around to it. I know I keep saying that, but there are just like so many other, you know, time-sensitive videos that seem to rise to the top of the priority list first, but I will get to that. It might be after this baby is born, but that was a very, very difficult labor. And I had a 35-hour labor with prodromal labor before that, and I was absolutely exhausted. Now, in my first birth being so long and exhausting and drawn out, there were a few calls that my midwife at the time made that I was not so on board with, which I'll discuss those whenever I tell my story about that. But thankfully, I feel like God was watching over us, and you know, things turned out in the end really well, and my son came out healthy, but there were a few complications that could have gone really wrong, and had those things happened, not being in or near a hospital could have been a bad situation. So I feel like after my first birth, I got a little more perspective. You know, being a first-time mom, I was even crunchier then than I am now. I definitely had that mentality of like, I've done all my research, like I know what I am doing, this is the route that I want to go. Women have been doing this for thousands of years with no problem, and you know, yada yada yada. I had all of my reasons and my whole plan for having my natural home birth, and you know, like I said, thankfully it turned out well, but it gave me a lot of perspective because things could have gone really wrong, even though they didn't. They were like on the verge of going really wrong. So when I was pregnant with my daughter the second time around, that's why I chose last time to go with a standalone birth center with midwives. If you want to see my whole pregnancy with her, I documented that one. That was actually the reason I started YouTube, was to document my second pregnancy with my daughter Sophie. So if you want to see that whole playlist, I'll link that here. But because I had had the home birth experience that I had before, I was choosing this time, even though I still really liked midwifery care, I still wanted to be closer to a hospital, if that makes sense. And at the time, my son was 2 years old, and I felt like if he heard me in that kind of pain, you know, saw me, that kind of thing, it might have been a little traumatizing for him at that time, knowing his personality and that he is very sensitive and empathetic. I feel like at that age it would have been difficult for him. So for that reason, and because I wanted to be closer to a hospital, I chose to go the birth center route with the midwives. Now that birth center was actually a 2-minute drive from the hospital that I am going to this time. So that was one of the things I really liked about it, because I felt like if something were to go wrong, like I could be at the hospital that fast. Whereas where we were living before when I gave birth, you know, we're kind of between two hospitals at the time, and it was at least a half hour if we were driving fast either way. So I feel like if something had been truly an emergency, you know, I mean, I suppose we probably would have called 911 if it was a true emergency. But even still, I mean, tick, 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 sometimes there are things that need immediate attention, and if a half an hour goes, but even if 15-20 minutes go by, it can be a problem. So that being said, that's why I went that route with my second baby, because the birth center was so close to the hospital, literally like a couple blocks away. So that gave me a lot of peace of mind from that standpoint. In that playlist I just linked, there is also the story of my daughter's birth, which was a totally different experience from my first birth, which was extremely long and drawn out. The birth of my daughter Sophie was really fast. Now, granted, I had preeclampsia last time, was like very borderline preeclampsia, and they did a castor oil induction with me because my blood pressure was getting higher and higher, and like it was becoming medically necessary for me to deliver. Now, by the time I took the castor oil to the time she was out was a total of 6 hours compared with 35 before. And the last 4 centimeters, I went from a 6 to a 10 in 20 minutes. So, you know, the first couple hours was a little bit slower, but then those last 20 minutes, let me tell you, that was the most intense, painful experience of my life. I was a screamer, you guys. Like, I am normally a very introverted person, but I was screaming my head off. Like, you can ask my husband, you can ask my mom who was there. They were like, wow, you were really loud. I felt like I was completely out of control. The midwives were telling me afterwards that there's like this thing called it's like a baby eject kind of reflex, where your body is just like, it's unconscious, your body is just pushing the baby out. And that was my experience with her. Like, I didn't even realize I was pushing, basically. Like, all of a sudden she was out after, you know, 20 minutes of extreme, excruciating pain and screaming. So that was my experience with my second. And then because I had that experience, it honestly, in this pregnancy, has given me a little more fear about birth than I even had the first 2 times. You know, the first time you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. Like, you have a concept, but you know, it's easy to be philosophical about it and say like, oh, women have been doing this for thousands of years. Yes, that's true, but that's because there's no choice. There's no choice in the matter. You just do it because that's what your body does. Now, granted, that said, I still am very much on board with the philosophy that birth is a natural physiological process and not a medical event. But that said, it is, I'm not gonna lie, like, it is excruciatingly painful. And while I feel like I wouldn't have wanted my first 2 births to go any other way, I needed to have those experiences, and I really am glad that I had 2 entirely unmedicated births, because I really feel like, just for my own sake, it showed me like what I'm made of. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you feel like in your body that you are on the knife edge of survival, but you survive it, it just gives you this sense of empowerment and accomplishment. Nobody can take that away from me, that I birthed my own children completely unmedicated, and I did it. I felt like I was gonna die, but I made it through. You know what I'm saying? And that was incredibly empowering. So I feel like I have had that experience. Like, I know what I am capable of now, but at the same time, having had that experience before, like, I know what I am getting myself into this time. Like, I know. And it's probably going to be a pretty fast labor this time. I mean, that's my guess. You never know what's going to happen. You just never know. But given that my second labor was so lightning fast, especially the last 20 minutes of it, I'm just aware that that could happen again this time, and it could be very, very intense. And I feel like I don't feel like I need to like prove that to myself this time, if that makes sense. Like, I don't need to ask myself, can I do it? Because I know I can. You know what I'm saying? Because I did it twice. I feel like, you know, the 3rd time around, I feel like I'm a lot more relaxed and, you know, maybe humbled about it. And I have no shame in wanting to seek pain relief this time. That's the whole point I'm getting to, is that that was one of the main reasons I wanted to go the hospital route this time, was because I wanted to have the epidural option. Now, like I said, this could go crazy fast and I might not have the option. I might end up having an unmedicated birth again, and I know I can do it, and you know, I will survive it, and I will probably feel incredibly empowered by it again. But if it's not that fast and I have time to get an epidural, I have decided that that is the route that I want to go this time. So that is the main reason I have chosen to go the hospital route this time, but still being with nurse midwives at the hospital, because I still am so on board with the midwife philosophy of things being more natural, just viewing birth, like I said, as a physiological process rather than a medical event, but still having the option of using, you know, the medical technology for pain relief, but still treating everything else as a natural physiological process. So that is my whole philosophy behind my birth plan. And I guess the other main reason was, in my last pregnancy, like I said, I was basically developing preeclampsia. And even though I felt like I had very good care at the birth center from the midwives and they handled it beautifully, I did have to do a castor oil induction. And that, if you guys don't know, it's kind of unpleasant, you know. Look it up if you don't know the effects of castor oil. But it was effective and it worked. But I also feel like if I were to be in that preeclampsia kind of situation again, I am okay with doing a Pitocin induction. Like, I don't want to do a Pitocin induction for any other reason other than a true medical reason like that. Like, I'm not gonna go and get induced just because I'm feeling impatient, you know? Like, I want my body to naturally go into labor and do its own thing. But, you know, in the case of preeclampsia, if I am in that situation again, I would rather have that option than taking the castor oil, if you know what I'm saying. So that is the whole background of my birthing experiences and why I am choosing to go the hospital route with the midwives this time. So that is the context for my birth plan.